Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. This has been an exciting time for me, especially because I thought my talk was tomorrow. So you may have seen me running up and down the stairs. In the 3 years it's been since I came here pre-pandemic, I've forgotten everything about where everything was, so I'm just happy to be in the right room. I am in the right room, right? I mean, this is, okay, good. All right. Okay, so, before I start, I have to say that this is the second and, well, third technically, because last year there was an in-person event kind of mid-year optimistically in the center of the US, which was good, very good. But this is the second really big return to normalcy type of event that I've been to after DevNexus in Atlanta, Georgia a couple weeks ago. So I'm just shocked and impressed that so many people are out, and I'm thrilled to be here. So thanks for letting me come back. I do want to get a photo. Normally I'm not quite so indulgent on this, but you guys are an awesome crowd. So I just want to capture you here. So if I can flip this around. Oh my gosh. So let's, I don't know what would be a good thing, because debug just sounds terrible, right? How about, let's get our mouse, how about let everyone say spring, spring. And then over here, spring. All right, okay, so that works. I always used to say, and I still maintain this, I want to have some proof that I'm actually here doing some work for my boss, so he doesn't just think I'm taking in the Stockholm coffee scene, which I am, by the way. But anyway, so let's get started, because I have a lot of stuff I want to cover. The wonderful thing about a topic like this is that there's so much you can cover. The terrible thing is there's so much you can cover, and they literally only gave me 3 hours here to do this. So we're going to have to hurry. It's only 15 minutes. Don't panic. Nobody run for the exits. But that does mean it is pretty intense, pretty quick. I have tried to distill this down to some very basic fundamentals, because I feel like if you don't get the fundamentals, nothing else really matters. But if you want to talk deeper, further, all that, it's good. Ping me afterward, and we'll go into much more detail. But again, we're going to start from the ground up, making very few assumptions. So welcome to this afternoon's talk on Das Boot, or Das Boot. Gosh, we have so many terrible puns on the word boot, but what's one more, right? So, and I realize that is, that's German, and anyway, so those of you who've been to my talks before know that my jokes are absolutely terrible, so no guarantees. Here we go. So we're going to dive into debugging Spring Boot applications, but more generally, we're going to dive into finding truth, right? Because many times we make assumptions, and whether we're junior developers or senior developers, and I often say when you're a junior developer, you do this more out of just habit, right? But when you're a senior developer, you make mistakes too. You make assumptions, and assumptions are killers. They kill a lot of time and a lot of brain cells and a lot of happy thoughts, right? Because there have been many times you, I, everybody here has looked at something and we just, what's going on? Come take a look at my code, right? And somebody comes over and and let's say they go, okay, what's happening here? And you explain to them, well, here's what's happening. Do you know that's what's happening? Yeah, I'm sure that's what's happening. Well, what's going on? Well, it's not printing anything. It's not showing anything. It's not doing anything. And you say, well, why is that happening? Well, it's not getting a value. Okay, how do you know that? Well, I know that because it's not doing anything, right? Let's see, let's verify. And when you verify, sometimes you get a very rude awakening that actually what you thought was happening, what you were sure was happening, isn't really what's happening. And that's what this is all about, is finding that source of truth. So I guess I kind of got ahead of myself. I got on my little soapbox before I introduced myself. Sorry about that. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Heckler. I am a principal cloud advocate of Java and JVM languages at Microsoft. I was formerly of VMware, formerly of Pivotal, was in the Spring team. I do a lot of the same things that I did before. I just do them for Microsoft now. So I get to play with all the Spring toys and tools and do it in the Azure cloud. So it's kind of cool. But if you have any questions, comments, or feedback after the fact, again, we're going to cover this much of the very expansive topic. By all means, do reach out to me. I've listed a couple of email addresses here. These are the two that I check the least infrequently. Because I don't spend a lot of time on email, I do check it from time to time. It is kind of a necessary evil, but if you really want to reach out to me, Twitter is the best way. That's why I list my Twitter handle down there, MKHeck. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that I do bounce around a lot, but I do spend a lot of time on Twitter, kind of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you don't follow me on Twitter, I guess my first question would be why? Uh, but seriously, check it out. Follow me on Twitter. I share a lot of, I think, good information, terrible jokes, what have you. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback and you want to email, that's fine. If you want to tweet them publicly, that's fine. If you want to just share something behind the scenes and don't necessarily want to share it with the world, that's cool too. My DMs are open, so just shoot me a message. It's all good. A little bit about me. I am an architect and developer. I guess I can walk around for this part. I'm so used to being tethered there at the keyboard, but I can walk around. So a little bit about me. I am a software architect and developer by trade. I obviously am an advocate, as mentioned before. I have also co-authored a couple of books, contributed content and code to several other books, and finally did what I swore I would never do, which is write a book solo. Not recommended. Don't go there. It gives you full creative license and creativity and all this and choices, as long as your editors approve it, of course. But I actually did enjoy it a lot. It just is a lot of work, and I should have known better, but I did it anyway. So we'll talk about that later too. I am a Java champion, Java 1 rockstar, Groundbreaker ambassador, Kotlin developer expert, a few other things, which are really cool. But the other thing that I am is a licensed pilot. I throw that out because it's a little bit odd, I guess, but it gives you a different way to kind of see the world, literally. It also stretches your brain in different ways. I'm a fully instrument-rated pilot in the US, and that's kind of fun. So in my copious spare time, when I'm not flying on somebody else's planes, I'm flying my own. So that's kind of cool. I have a good time anyway. And I occasionally post pictures on Twitter as well. So here's the latest book. I published this, or it was published by O'Reilly last year. If you're interested in checking it out, if you're not, that's fine too. But if you are, follow the link. It will actually take you to a free trial of O'Reilly Safari Books online for 7, 14, whatever many days. Or if you have a corporate subscription, or you can buy it, that's fine. And of course, the book has a Twitter handle. So if you're interested, follow the book on Twitter, of course. So today's plan. I love good quotes. Again, wit is not my thing, sadly, but I love it when I see it. I know it when I see it. And Leonard Bernstein, who is a former composer and former conductor of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, once said this gem, and I love this: to achieve great things, 2 things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. And I think we have both those today. So let's dive in. So very quickly, what we're going to try to cover here in some degree, and I would rather cover fewer things better than more things badly. So if we don't get through all this, you know, it is what it is. Again, I'll happily talk about this more offline, out in the hallways, on Twitter, email, whatever. But we're going to start in and get through some of these topics, some or all. So application startup, we're going to discuss and see what actually happens when you start up your Spring Boot application. We will talk about and see bean initialization and configuration and some little quirks of that. We're going to look at debugging local apps via IDE. We're going to talk about Actuator and see Actuator in action and how that actually helps you see truth, right? Get to the truth versus making assumptions. And again, we'll also talk about debugging remote apps. Now, this is not a waterfall, so we're going to be kind of talking and coding and seeing and stepping through, but that's kind of the rough order of the plan for the day. So with that, let's dive into the code. Does anyone recognize this guy? Thank goodness. It's getting a little bit dated now, but yet it's still so good to watch. So if you haven't watched the IT crowd, find it, watch it. You're welcome. All right. So let's see. Let's get out here. Oh, come on. There we go. By the way, does anybody recognize this reference? Oh, thank you. Okay, good. Is that a hit here? Not a hit? I put off watching that forever. I had friends telling me, you have to watch this, you have to watch this. And of course, the more they pushed, the more I pushed back. And when I finally did start to watch it, I think it's on Apple TV, right? Super weird, quirky, but good. Anyway, so that's your commercial for somebody else's stuff. Okay, so we're going to start off with the Spring Initializer because that's where all good Spring Boot applications start, right? Not necessarily, but for today they are. And we're going to just, again, keep this really simple and streamlined. So I'm going to keep it on the main path here. I'm going to use Java and Maven. Maven for my build system. If you're a hipster, Gradle is there too. It's all good. I say that. I do use Gradle, especially when I'm doing Kotlin development, but that's another story for another day. So current version of Spring Boot, I'm going to just change this, just a little bit of the metadata from example.com to the hecklers.com because it's my talk. I can do that, right? And I'm going to change this to das Boot. Again, gosh, that just kills me. I swore I'd never do that, and it just seemed too good. Diving. Das Boot, diving. I would have probably had a German crowd rolling in the aisles on that one. Because you know Germans and their sense of humor, right? Okay, anyway. All right, so yeah, that got a bigger laugh. I don't know why. So debugging, oh boy. Yeah, typing is already downhill. So we're going to create just a simple project here. I'm going to use jar packaging because after all, it is the 21st century. I'm going to use the long-term supported version, the latest long-term supported version of Java 17. But again, Spring Boot covers all the way back and supports all the way back to 8, all the way forward to current version, which is 18. Do what makes you happy. I just like to stay on the LTSs, right? Because that's typically where most of us live, one way or the other. And again, going to keep this pretty simple. I'm going to bring in the Spring Web dependency, and I'm going to bring in Actuator. And that's it for right now. And probably, I will be lucky to get through any more than that. Oh, could not connect. Oh, sigh. One moment, please. Let's see. So, oh, yes. Let's see here. Oops. Typing is already a terrible thing. I need to slow down here. You can do it. Gives me time to take a drink anyway. I've been slamming coffee because the flights here were just crazy. We haven't restored normal flight schedules, so I had to go through a kind of a more circuitous route. And wouldn't you know it, every leg had issues. But I've been slamming a lot of coffee. Good coffee, by the way. But now my voice is kind of, so yeah, I'm going to be drinking water a lot. So let's see if we're in business now. Let me see if I can do this or if I have to. Oh, it does. It does work. Yay. Huzzah. Okay, so I'm going to drop this here on my desktop, and we'll open this. Yep, and we'll open that in our favorite IDE, NetBeans. Kidding. You know, when I say stuff like that, I think people assume that I don't like NetBeans, and it couldn't be further from the truth. I love NetBeans. NetBeans is a great IDE. I love IntelliJ. IntelliJ is a great IDE. VS Code, if you're not already familiar with Visual Studio Code and the plugins, it's a great IDE. Eclipse, that's an IDE. We all make choices, folks. Just make them good, right? So anyway, I like IntelliJ for my daily driver. I use Visual Studio Code a lot, but you know, people expect me to use Visual Studio Code because I work for Microsoft. That's why I show up running IntelliJ on a Mac, just to really throw things off. No, it's really what I use daily, actually. I do have a Windows gaming machine, though. That's awesome. Okay, so here's our POM. It's, again, pretty simple. Let's go ahead and we'll open up our application.properties. If you're not familiar with Spring Boot and how it works, there are places that you can pull in environment variables, defaults, what I like to call sensible defaults. That's really what your application.properties file inside your jar is for. You also have a way to look for that outside your jar, other places you can pull, which we will get to. I don't want to spoil the ending. Pardon me. But you also... It also supports YAML, so application.yaml, profiles, so on and so forth, so much more. We'll probably not go into any of that, well, to any great degree, but it's there. Okay, so just to start things off, so here is what your typical Spring Boot application looks like when you generate it with start.spring.io. And again, whether you use your IDE or the site or curl it or whatever, this is what you get, right? So this starts off, and this is a fully functional Spring Boot application when it starts up. What does it do? Well, let's take a look. There are a couple of things that I want to dive into very initially, right? So there are a couple of things that differ from a standard Java applications. The public static void main, that looks pretty familiar, right? But we've got this annotation up here. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. So we have this annotation up here, that Spring Boot application annotation. What is that? Well, let's dive into that. IntelliJ, it's Command B. So we'll go in and we'll take a look, and we see that that is a meta annotation. So that does other things, right? So we see that the Spring Boot application annotation, that's a lot of shuns here. Hopefully I won't get tongue tangled, and if I do, somebody just say, is that right? But we see that it's really, among pretty much at its base, it is a meta annotation for three things, right? And let me zoom in on that. So we have three annotations here: a Spring Boot configuration annotation, an enable auto configuration annotation, and a component scan annotation. So let's at least cover each of those rather quickly. The Spring Boot Spring Boot configuration annotation, let's dive into that. Let's drill into that a little bit more. And we see that it is a meta annotation. It's turtles all the way down. So we see that it's an annotation or a meta annotation that includes configuration, right? So configuration classes, if you're not familiar, allow you to define bean creation methods, which allows you to create beans and place them into your application context, right? So you're probably thinking, okay, what else does it do? Well, let's drill in a little bit further into the AtConfiguration annotation. And we see that AtConfiguration annotation is actually a meta annotation, which is, or should say, an alias for component. So who here's used AtComponent? Yeah, all right. So let's go ahead and drill into AtComponent. Isn't this fun? And it actually is. I kind of enjoy this. Hopefully you will as well. But if not, at least maybe you'll get something interesting out of it. I don't know. So when we get into AtComponent, what is an AtComponent? Well, I mean, that's kind of the end of the line down this. We trace this tree root all the way down. But AtComponent allows you to define a class that is used to create a bean from, right? So this is our foundation for a bean of some kind. So for instance, if we go back to our application here, so let's say we have, because we know that the Spring Boot application annotation includes all the way down to component, right? We know that it has AtConfiguration. So I guess let's, as an AtConfiguration, as a configuration class, we can define a bean creation method. Say that 3 times fast. And let's say we create a bean, a something bean, right? So we'll just create a method here, return new something. Okay, now the problem, of course, is that we haven't defined any class called something, so we'll just call this something, right? And immediately, IntelliJ is smart enough to say, hey, you're wanting to create a bean of type something, you have a class defined called something, we're all good, right? Now, again, if we just, let's get rid of this for the time being. Hey, I warned you, my jokes are terrible. That was probably the high point of this whole talk as far as humor, all right? So you're still here, that's on you. So let's say we define this as a component. So let's just do that. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself though. Let's put a pin in that. We'll come back to that momentarily. There's so many ways that I want to cover this, and all of them lead to the same basic thing, but it's just, again, I get lost and we lose time. So I'm going to follow this track. So we see that chasing all the way down from Spring Boot application to Spring Boot configuration, so on and so forth, we get all the way down to components, we get to AtConfiguration classes. So let's go ahead and back out of these. And of course, you can see proxy bean methods, because we can define bean methods and configuration classes and define our beans that we wish to have Spring create for us, right? All right, so we're going to go back here. Let's go ahead and look at our, well, we won't really chase into this. I'll keep this tight. So enable autoconfiguration, what does that mean? Well, has anybody ever heard the often derisive comment that Spring Boot applications, there's too much magic, or there's a lot of magic going on in there? Yeah, I mean, this is a common refrain. To be very clear, this isn't magic, it's technology, right? There's nothing magical about this, as you're starting to see, right? This is very well engineered, I don't say chaos, very well engineered structures, right? So this makes a lot of sense when you get into it. But the auto configuration is basically, to summarize, a bunch of conditions that are tested. And the auto configuration will say, okay, look, if you have this driver on your class path, and you have, I'll use Spring Data as an example. So if you have the MongoDB driver on your class path, and you have, you've extended a Spring Data repository in your code, your Spring Boot code, then you have a part of the auto configuration and the startup of the Spring Boot application. It will look and say, look, you've extended a Spring Data repository interface. You have MongoDB in your class path. I'll bet you want to talk to MongoDB. Does that sound magical? I mean, that sounds logical, right? So if you've come from a different world, an enterprise Java world outside of Spring, when you first see that, it is a little jarring. Jarring. Wow. Okay, we're done here. I'm kidding. Please, you don't have to laugh at my jokes. I find them hilarious, but you know. Okay, so, but that's what folks refer to as magic. But in most cases, I always think about it. When I first came to Spring, I found it jarring, if you will, because I didn't have to go through all of the different steps to just query, just issue a single select query on a database. And you know, when you stop and think about all those steps, they're all the same all the time, right? I mean, there are minor variations on a theme, regardless, whether you're talking to Mongo or JPA and MySQL or whatever, but they're all fairly consistent every time. So if you can have your framework auto-config for that, it says, look, you've got Mongo in your class path, you're extending a Spring Data repository, I've got this. That's what auto-configuration does for you. You can override it, you can tell it to back off with a property or creating your own bean in many cases, but it does that for you. And I'll show you kind of to what extent here momentarily as well. The last one though, really quickly, because I get off on a soapbox and then I lose track because I find this fascinating, is the @component scan. And what that allows you to do is in your code, in your project, you can define components, you can establish bean creation methods, and what it allows you to do is it scans for, well, especially like the components, the @service, so any kind of aliases for components, basically, and it will look for those and it will create those for you and place those into your dependency injection container, your application context, sometimes colloquially referred to as the bean bucket, right? So it does all of this for you to kind of fully form your application based on a few annotations, a little bit of code, and a lot of conditions that it logically and rationally applies upon startup. Super awesome, right? Or if you do native compilation ahead of time. So anyway, so that's kind of a quick and hopefully not too dirty overview of the Spring Boot application annotation. The other thing that we can get into is the Spring application.run. So this is a static method, and let's go ahead and drill into that. And we see that this run method calls another run method, which calls another run method. Actually, it initializes a Spring application and then calls run on that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that really quickly. So we see it is turtles all the way down. And these are the steps that typically occur when you start up your Spring application, your Spring Boot application. Now, I should go back. Let me see if I can do this. Let's see. So, nope. Do this the hard way. Okay. So you see what's being returned here, right? And I mentioned that the application context is your dependency injection container. There it is. We're just returning that. We're creating that and returning that. And the way we do that, again, is to drill in. And let's go back here. So there are a series of steps that are run each time your application is started up. As you might remember, if you've done Spring Boot applications before, it gives you kind of a, your application took 1.7 seconds to start up. Your JVM's been running for 1.9, or if it's a much larger app, obviously much longer time. But this is how it does it. It does a time check to begin, and then it starts stepping through each of these. Now, I'm going to, actually, I normally kind of step through these, but since everything initially, well, I'll do it really quickly here. Why not? And we'll kind of just hit the high points, and then I'll dive into the next thing. So I'm going to start this. It's starting. Yeah, this is going to be the longest startup sequence ever, just because I'm stepping through this instead of just letting it run through. So just patience, please. Okay, so we've got the first thing it does is do the time check. It starts, creates the bootstrap context. So let me see. F8, by the way, in IntelliJ is step over. F7, step into. There are a few other little nice keys, but those are the two that you're going to wear out your fingers on. As you can see, you create an empty context. And I'm going to skip through this pretty quickly so I don't lose a lot of time on this, because I want to dive into it a little bit more as we go. Pardon the pun again. We're configuring a headless property because we still have to deal with, yes, we're not wanting to use AWT in our Java application. Sorry. You see that we have no arguments. It's an empty array, so that really doesn't do anything. That's why I can get through this part quickly, because we've done not much really at this point. We indicate that our listeners are starting, and we go through application arguments, process those. Nothing there at this point. We haven't passed anything in. We define our environment, prepare our environment. Banner. Anybody familiar with the banner? My former colleague, Josh, loves to say, don't turn that off. If you're really, I'm not quite so dogmatic on that. If you really want to shave a few milliseconds off your startup time, you can do that, because if you step into this, you can see that it actually does a resource load. You can also load an external file, so on and so forth. It doesn't save you a lot, but if you're really hard up for time, startup, and you want to stay on the JVM, that's cool. That's an option. And that's just a property setting, which I can show you after the fact if you're curious. It's easy. Again, we create an empty application context. We set any kind of startup we want to, prepare it, refresh it, and then we have some things that may potentially fire off after the refresh. Come on, you can do it. Again, stepping through this, it takes a little more time. And actually, that's kind of what I wanted to show you Well, there's just a little bit more down here. So we've got our time, and then here, the call runners. I'm going to step into this, and I'll probably step into this more later, again, depending on how quickly we go through this. Here's where we start up any beans of type application runner or command line runner. Is anyone familiar with the differences between those two? It's kind of an esoteric difference, really. Command line runner just takes your command line arguments as a unit, as a string, and just goes, or series of arguments, I should say, an array of arguments. Anyway, and then the application, or excuse me, the application runner actually parses those and creates an application object, or application parameters object. So it's a little more overhead, but hardly any. So anyway, I'm going to stop us there because what I want to do is go back and get into the bean creation, bean initialization configuration. So that's kind of the quick look at what happens when you start up your Spring Boot application by default. Now, again, we have this component we've created out here called something. So I'm going to just create a very simple something, and we'll just say public something, and we'll just print something out here, initializing something. Clever, right? Okay, so, and actually I don't want to stop that. And I also want to make this a little easier to see. So we'll just clear a path around this here. And then let's go ahead and just run this to make sure it works. And then I'll step back in because I want to stop this at a point. So we see we're initializing something. So that handles that, again, upon initialization for you. That's why anything you define as an AtComponent or with an AtBean method, a bean creation method, then it's done upon startup automatically. Yep. So let me go back here. And actually, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and do this because this is easier. So we'll restart, and I'll go into debug mode. Pardon me. It's not COVID. All right, so I want to go down here to, well, any place would probably do. Yeah, let's just stop it there. That's fine. So I don't remember. Let's see. I think run to cursor. Yeah, all right, so there we go. So we're here. Boy, that is tough, but fortunately I can control the zoom. So with this, let's go in and take a look here at our, let's see, context. There we go. Sometimes hard for me to find even when I've zoomed in. So we've got our mean factory, post processors. Nope, excuse me. There it is, bean factory. So if we look at this, remember, we have literally one component we've defined, right? Something. We've defined one bean. So really quickly, does anybody want to take a guess how many beans Spring Boot is configuring for you upon startup based on what you have, again, what you've put into your class path? So we have 267, minus R1, 267 beans that are created via auto-configuration. It's a little scary at times, but again, this is the work that goes into creating your application on your behalf. Now, what type of beans? Well, we have Spring Web, right, for our dependency. And what does that do? It listens for requests, it processes requests. You have Tomcat, embedded Tomcat. You have JSON marshalling and unmarshalling via Jackson. You have a lot of things that Spring Boot via its autoconfig is creating beans to work on your behalf with. Again, can be overridden based on beans that you create, which tells it to back off, or even properties a lot of times that it checks for. So I like to point that out because I think that's kind of interesting. Let's go back and do some changes here. Oops, there we go. Now, what I want to do next at this point is just change this up a little bit and go to a REST controller, and let's really quickly examine what a REST controller is. So we drill in here, we see that a REST controller is nothing but a controller that provides an object, an unmarshaled object or marshaled object, as its response body, right? So it doesn't return a string that is then processed by a template engine to serve up HTML to our client, right? So the important thing, at least for now, what I want to concentrate on in that REST controller is a controller. So we go in and look, and we see that a controller is a component, right? So we know that this is a bean that's going to be created again for us by defining it this way. Now I'm going to change this to string, and we'll just make this public, and we'll change this to return. And oops, let's see. And I want to, let's say, plus bean owner plus apostrophe s bean. All right, so we're going to initialize oops, someone's bean here. And we'll make this at get mapping. We'll keep this very simple. So who's bean? Well, let's again start off by just creating a private string bean owner. And then what do we do to get that? Well, let's use @value, which is an annotation. And I'm going to pull that from our environment, right? So we'll call this bean owner. And let's see what we get. So let's run this. And we'll see that we have some problems, right? Because we haven't defined anywhere in our application who this mysterious bean owner is. So we'll see something like this, right? Error creating, could not resolve placeholder bean owner in value $bean owner. Well, we can actually define a default value. So what's your name, sir? Yeah, you, yeah. He looks at his neighbor, he's like, not me. Oh my gosh. Okay. Can you spell that? A-N? That was how I would go for it, but you know what? There are 3 or 4 different ways to spell Mark, okay? And that's 4 letters, or 5, depending. But okay, so let's go ahead and restart this. There is a method to my madness, by the way, so thanks for bearing with me on this. Oh, come on. There we go. Oh, interesting. I have a little extra character in there. Okay, so let's go ahead and restart this. I'll go ahead and pull up terminal. Let's blow that up, and let's center that. I use HTTP 8080, and let's see what we get. Yes, okay. So we've initialized your bean. Life's good. Okay. Now, that's our default value, and that's just a little bit of Spring expression language magic. Keep going back to magic. But if we want to define that somewhere, what I'm going to do is define that here. So owner equals, and what is your name, please? Akiro, A-K-H-I-R-O? All right, so let's run this and see what we get. Actually, let's go ahead and run this. Then I'll come back to this, okay? Because I'm kind of mixing concepts in here. I am both gratified that someone is paying attention and disappointed you didn't let me get away with that, okay? Because at this point, we're going to say, this should be Akihiro's bean, but it's not. It's still Anders' bean. What are you doing here? Oh, that's crazy. All right, so how do we know where this came from? Well, in this case, it's pretty simple, right? Because I just did this. There aren't a whole lot of things going on in this application just yet, so we can see this. But this is where things like Actuator really comes in, when you need to suss out the source of truth for this. So I'm going to do something that I'm not proud of. Please don't do this in production. I'm going to expose all of Actuator's endpoints. Actuator gives you a lot, or gives anyone a lot of information and potentially about your application, things that you don't necessarily want a hostile actor to see. So I like to put this: please do not do this in production. There be dragons here. All right, so anyway. Okay, so I do this because I don't want anyone going back and saying, Mark did this, so it's got to be good, right? No, this is a terrible idea. It's great for demos, bad for production. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this. The value of this, and this is why I feel like this is important for a debugging talk, because not everything is about stepping through things in the debugger, although many things are. But in cases where you just need to find out the source of truth, we don't know why this is Anders' bean, right? Or potentially, in this case, we kind of do. But if we go to localhost, in this case, we'll go to Actuator. Actuator has a lot of different endpoints that give you, again, that great insight into your application that maybe you don't necessarily want others to have. But in times like this, it's really great to help figure out what's going on. You have things like config props, environment, and in this case, I'm going to drill into environment just to start off with. And if we want to search for bean owner, we see that it's not there, right? Because we've actually defined that as a default in a string. So that we don't have. But if we go back and let's go to redefine this, so that would tell us right there that it's not getting this value, right? Because it's not seeing this. It's not telling us that it's in our application properties, because once you have something that's picked up from there, then you can go here and we'll do a refresh. Yep, it is restarted, okay. And we'll do bean owner, and there we go. So we see exactly where it's coming from. Close that and zoom in. We see that the value is Akihiro, the class path resource in application properties. We even see the line and column number where this is defined, which is super great because you go out here and you look and you go right over there at the beginning of Akihiro, and we go down here and we zoom in and we see right there it's line 1, column 11. So it gives you a lot of insights. Now, where this gets interesting is when things get a little more chaotic, right? So I'm going to stop this. And I'm going to go to my terminal. Let's see, I put that on the desktop, right? Desktop, das bot, and let's do a Java. Oh, actually, I need to Maven clean package, and let's get a little creative with this and see what we can turn up. Everybody with me so far? Having fun? Yeah, all right. Well, everybody spin the propellers. All right, this is good stuff. Okay, so Java. Oh, before I do that, so let's do this. Let's export a value. We call this bean owner, right? Right, okay, all right. You killjoy. All right. Okay, so let's see. What is your name, please? Right behind you. You, ma'am. Julia, Julia. All right, it's a good day. All right, so spelling is, again, not my forte, but we've got this, right? So let's do a java-jar. Let's just run this from the command line, and let's see what we get, right? Who thinks you know what we'll get? Wow, that's a crowd with some self-image problems here. Okay, other than this, we got Julia's bean. How do we know where that came from? Well, let's go back to Actuator again really quickly. Let's refresh. Let's find bean owner, and the first one that we see at the top says it is coming in from the system environment, right? System environment property, bean owner. But it also tells you where else we might find this, and of course, that's overriding in order of precedence, Akihiro. Anders, you're in there as just like a default value in a string that is parsed. So sorry, you don't show up in here, but it is what it is, right? Now, you might be wondering, where can you find the order of precedence? That's actually here. Well published in the Spring Boot documentation for externalized configuration. There are a series of, it looks here, the Spring Boot application looks here, and then it looks here, and then it looks here, and anything in the higher order of precedence overrides everything before that. But again, assumptions, right? Check your assumptions, because you may be assuming this is Anders' bean, and you're wondering, where did Julia come from? In a production environment, that's very common, right? Okay, so let's go one step further, because we're having a good time, right? So let's just close this out. And we know, because we have echo $bean owner, we see that that's Julia, right? So we got that. But now what do we do? Let's just try to do this, and let's say bean owner equals, what's your name? Just steepled or cross. Helena, Helena. 2 for 2. This is a great day. Okay, coffee for everyone. All right, so let's run this. And then we'll see what we get now, all right? So I'm going to pop over here. Any guesses? Who said Julia? Okay, well, we'll see, right? Let's find out. Helena, why? Let's go back to Actuator again, and let's go check it out, because Actuator, in this case, tells us the source of truth. This is great, right? This helps deconflict and move us past assumptions into facts. So again, we get to bean owner, and our first one at the top tells us it's passed in via command line arguments, right? And then if we, again, go on down, we see, yeah, helps when you don't overwrite, bean owner. And then we see the next one in precedence would be Julia. The next one would be Akihiro. And then, of course, Anders is bringing up the rear. That's cool. All right. So that's kind of the high points there. We've got a little over 10 minutes. Yeah, and there's my sign. Okay. So let's see what... I have a list of things that, like a wish list, that I want to cover. We've got this, we got this. Environment variable, command line, remote debugging. Okay, so actually before I do that, I think I can slide in one more thing here that I wanted to show you. And it's not a big deal really, but I kind of like to do that because the command line runner stuff, again, I mentioned, you've probably seen something like this. So, runner, do something. And actually, yeah, I can do this. Okay, so command line runner, again, since Java 8, what can you do? You have a default method here. You can provide a Lambda for the implementation of it. So I'm going to keep this really simple. Let's see, in the the command line runner, right? And we'll just set the breakpoint for that. And actually, you know what? Again, this just helps set it off a bit. And do I still have my breakpoints? I do still have my breakpoints. It's fine. So that's perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and debug this. Oh, I did not stop my other one. That's going to bark at me. Hold on. I think I can do that. Okay, did I save it in time? Let's find out. I did. Woot. Okay, so let's go on in here. Oh, I skipped over. All right, let's try that again. Bother. Skip ahead. F7N. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. And we see that our runners at this point is size 0. Again, this is just something I like to do because I think in my mind helps clarify that actually things are happening as you'd expect them. We've added our single command line runner and so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and continue. And again, very simple stuff. But again, the command line runners are processed toward the end. Application runners, command line runners toward the end. So really quickly, I want to get into the, I told you to be fast. Really quickly, I want to get into the remote debugging. Because whether you're dealing, when you're dealing with everything right here in your debugger on your local or your local machine, everything works pretty well, right? It's when you deploy sometimes that gets a little tricky because you have a little different environment. So whether you're doing remote debugging, whether it's a bare metal, a VM or a container, it all basically works the same way with minor variations on a theme. With Spring Boot, there are some interesting things that you get into with the image creation and whatnot. Again, happy to talk about those more offline as time permits after the fact or online afterward. But the simple, I guess the path of least resistance to get there, I'm going to go ahead and add a configuration here, and we will add this. Remote JVM debugging, and we'll just name this remote debug. And if you see this, let me zoom in on this a little bit. Here are your command line arguments for your remote JVM. Now I'm running this all locally, but it works exactly the same. And I'll show you a little bit about the container commands you have to, or the Docker file commands you have to add to be able to do this when you're running in a container. But I'm going to copy this, and then we'll OK that. So we have our remote debug configuration here. And then let's go ahead and rerun this. And let me go here to the beginning. Oh, there we go. I'm not sure what's going on there. Oh, yeah, it does help when you... There we go. And we'll place that at the beginning. And then, of course, since I'm using Z shell, I need to go back and include this in quotes just to keep this happy. So let's go ahead and do this here. We'll pin that to the left side so we see it's running. And I wonder if I can do this and have this look reasonable. Why not, right? Okay, so that should work. Okay, so at this point we have a remote debug. Let's go ahead and debug this. And we'll connect. And did I set a breakpoint? I did not. We're going to restart this. It's fine. So when I restart this, we can see that we disconnect and we'll reconnect. It doesn't show a reconnect, but it shows the disconnect. And then let's go ahead and hit our endpoint again. Oh, what did I do? This always works in live environments. Things never go wrong when you're running in production here. Let's see. What happened? Oh, isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's not liking that at all.
You have to click on the down to in the debugger interface pane.
Yes.
Up,
Yeah.
left. No, same.
Yeah, here, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I did. Oh, did I not restart? Hold on.
You can silence the.
Yeah, look, it did it again. That's
It's the crossed over red circle above the little camera in the debug window. Down, left, down, up.
yes. Okay. Oh, did I? No, it's not. Hold on a second. Well, that's just not happy at all. Hold on. Well, I mean, it is connecting. That's so weird. Oh, I thought you said reboot. I was like, oh my gosh, I hope not. Oh my goodness. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our configurations. Did I do anything weird here? Remote debug. But I did restart it though. Hold on. Hold on. Let's edit configurations. That is so weird. I literally have never had that happen. Okay, so remote JVM debug, remote take 2, all right. Attach localhost, copy, okay it, right? We'll start it again. Wow, this is anticlimactic. Okay, so let me think about this for a second. And this is showing up as this, so that's kind of weird. So let me just do a. Oh, you know what? Did I do that over here? Indeed, maybe I did not. Okay, well that would explain a lot, wouldn't it? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I apparently cut the corner on that a little closer than I intended to. Sorry about that. If that is the case, yeah, I was going to say you win a free T-shirt, but I don't have any with me, and I'm not going to take this one off because then people would literally scream running to the door. So we're not going to do that. Okay, but I will thank you very, very heartily here. So here we go. Let's try that again. Let's debug. Oh no, I have that breakpoint set, but at least it is working. So let's do this, and let's go here, and we'll try this again. Ah, voila. Wonderful! Yay! Okay, so you should override all the other beans. Okay. All right. This is what I love, because even when things go wrong, when you have this many developers in a room, somebody's going to spot it. And they're going to go, ha, you dummy, you missed this. Okay, cool. All right, so we're in. We see this. This gives you another good way. Again, you set your breakpoints. And in this case, again, very simple example, but we can see clearly the bean owner is Helena, so we're good, right? So with that, gosh, we're really close, so I guess we'll stop there. Let me go ahead and restart this. And no, it started at the beginning. I love PowerPoint. Okay, so some helpful resources. Again, I thought my talk was tomorrow, so I haven't actually checked this into GitHub, but I will be checking this into GitHub under Das Boot and putting some more stuff in there as well. So if you want to watch, start the repository or whatever, I guess watch just so you get notifications when I add stuff and tweak things as we go. By all means do so. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, obviously I'm here. But if you're like me and you think of things 10 minutes after you walk away, I walk away, or we leave after this week, that's fine. I do that all the time. Ping me, email me, better yet, tweet me, or DM me on Twitter. It's all good. That's why I hit it on bold. That's where the best way to reach me is. And thanks for coming. Thanks for coming to JFocus, and let's enjoy.